Good evening. This is the A Course in Miracles Palm Beach Study Group. We are reading Chapter 6, Section 4, The Only Answer. It is on page 100 in the book. Remember that the Holy Spirit is the answer, not the question. The ego always speaks first. It is capricious and does not mean its maker well. It believes, and correctly, that its maker may withdraw his support from it at any moment. If it meant you well, it would be glad, as the Holy Spirit will be glad when he has brought you home and you no longer need his guidance. The ego does not regard itself as part of you. Herein lies its primary error, the foundation of its whole thought system. So the Holy Spirit is the answer and not the question. The Holy Spirit is the answer to the dilemma that we find ourselves in. And the ego's voice is always going to speak first. And it does not mean its maker well. Well, that's you. You made the ego. And so the ego does not mean you well. And it knows that you're trying to work yourself out of ego and into spirit. And so it's afraid. And if the ego were like the Holy Spirit, he'd be glad for you that you were trying to evolve as a spiritual being. But he's not. And so this just shows that the ego does not regard itself as a part of you, even though you made it, which is completely different from God's point of view. God made us, but he considers us a part of him. And but we made the ego, but the ego doesn't consider us to be part of him. And then it ends, herein lies the primary error, the ego error, the foundation of its whole thought system, of ego's thought system. Are there any questions? You're muted, Suzanne. You have to unmute, Suzanne. Suzanne, I see your mouth moving, but I don't. There you go.
I have a hard time with this.
All right. What is the hard time?
Realize the primary error. The ego does not regard itself as part of you. That part. The ego does not regard itself as part of you. Well, then what is it a part of?
It thinks itself is independent.
Wow.
Let's remember here that we're talking of the term ego in the way that A Course in Miracles is using it.
Yeah.
And not necessarily the Freudian ego term. People have to understand when they're studying the Course that they have to get the definition of the words in order. So I know Freudian thought is the ego, the id, the ego, the superego, that kind of stuff. But in A Course in Miracles, there's the ego mind and the spirit mind. The ego mind is a purely human mind that's full of fear and things and guilt and thinks itself separate from God, and spirit mind is just the opposite. Spirit mind says, "Oh, no, no, you're a spiritual being. You're one with God. God's one with you. Spirit is joy and peace and love." And the ego is the opposite of spirit. So for the purposes of A Course in Miracles, I guess the best way to describe the ego or to define the ego is to say, well, it's just the opposite of spirit. So the Course is teaching us that we have a split mind, that half of our mind is this ego mind, and the other half is the spirit mind, and right in the middle is the decider, and that's our free will, because we always have the choice of whether we're listening to ego or to spirit, whether we're going to follow ego or spirit. It's kind of like that old thing about, you got the devil and the angel on either shoulder. That's the same thing. Are you going to listen to the devil or are you going to listen to the angel? Does that clear it up?
Yeah, no, I remember, we've done the Course in Miracles before. I remember the word ego always comes up, but never quite this way. Does not regard itself as part of you. That statement is,
okay, well,
that's all. For me.
Let's continue that and see what more it has to say. So paragraph 2. When God created you, he made you part of him. That is why attack within the kingdom is impossible. You made the ego without love, and so it does not love you. You could not remain within the kingdom without love. And since the kingdom is love, you believe that you are without it. This enables the ego to regard itself as separate and outside its maker, thus speaking for the part of your mind that believes you are separate and outside the mind of God. The ego then raised the first question that was ever asked, but one it can never answer. That question, what are you, was the beginning of doubt. The ego has never answered any questions since, although it has raised a great many. The most inventive activities of the ego have never done more than obscure the question, because you have the answer and the ego is afraid of you. So I hope that helps to clarify. Let's continue. Paragraph 3. You cannot understand the conflict until you fully understand the basic fact that the ego cannot know anything. The Holy Spirit does not speak first, but he always answers. Everyone has called upon him for help at one time or another, and in one way or another, and has been answered. Since the Holy Spirit answers truly, he answers for all time, which means that everyone has the answer now. So if the ego is asking its unanswerable question, what are you? And it cannot answer that. But Holy Spirit does answer it. And Holy Spirit says, you are the child of God. You are spirit. That's who you truly are. You are love. You are joy. You are peace. You are all that God made you, and God made you in his image. So you are all that God is. And that's Holy Spirit's answer. And that answer is for always. That always has been the answer. That always will be the answer. That is the answer. You are a spiritual being. You are not your ego self. People who say, well, I'm only human. Well, excuse me, but you're not only human. You're having a human experience. You're occupying a human body, but your essence, the true self, who you truly are, is not the body. It's not the human. You are in reality spirit. And when you think of yourself as spirit, then you come to realize that yourself in that way. Any comments? If you want to speak, you need to unmute. You're still muted. You're still muted, Suzanne. I see your lips moving, but we don't hear you. I'm sorry, Suzanne, you don't have your control of your mute button?
Touch it lightly.
I think she's on a computer. Suzanne,
I was reading.
oh, you were reading. You're moving your lips, so I think you're talking to us.
I was reading the passages as you were reading them. That's why I was on the other screen, and I was unable to get back here. It's so profound, you know. It's just such a. It's just very profound, and it's so different. I mean, from everything we've ever learned.
It is.
You know, and it makes sense. It's just that division. It's why. I mean, can they ever get together? They can never get together. The ego and the spirit.
No.
Enemies.
No, it's not a question of enemies. It's that the ego isn't real. Only spirit is real. The ego is the illusion. The ego is the dream. It has no reality unto itself. It just thinks it does.
And it rules the world, doesn't it?
Well, only if people allow it to. We created it. We have control of it. And that's what we're doing here with studying the course, is learning how to let it go. You don't have to fight the ego. You just have to let it go. You just have to embrace the spirit. If you're in a dark room, all you have to do is turn on the light, and then woof, there's no darkness.
Right.
That's the same thing in your mind. Just turn on your spirit mind, and the ego mind disappears. The ego mind's the darkness. All right, so we're on paragraph 4. And it says, the ego cannot hear the only spirit, the Holy Spirit, but it does believe that part of the mind that made it is against it. It interprets this as a justification for attacking its maker. It believes that the best defense is attack and wants you to believe it. Unless you do believe it, you will not side with it. And the ego feels badly in the need of allies, though not of brothers. Perceiving something alien to itself in your mind, the ego turns to the body as its ally, because the body is not part of you. This makes the body the ego's friend. It is an alliance, frankly, based on separation. If you side with this alliance, you will be afraid, because you are siding with an alliance of fear. The important thing here is to realize that you are not your body. Yes, you're in a body, but you are not your body. You are a spiritual being which does not have a body. It just inhabits a body while living a human experience. So paragraph 5 says the ego uses the body to conspire against your mind. And because the ego realizes that its enemy, that's you, can end them both merely by recognizing they are not part of you, they join in the attack together. This is perhaps the strangest perception of all, if you consider what it really involves. The ego, which is not real, attempts to persuade the mind, which is real, that the mind is the ego's learning device, and further, that the body is more real than the mind is. No one in his right mind could possibly believe this, and no one in his right mind does believe this. And the ego uses the body to try to control us. That's why we feel pain. That's ego attacking us when we feel pain. And when it says no one in his right mind believes that, that means no one in his spiritual mind believes it. Yes, David.
So those last couple of sentences, I don't understand. Could you go over them?
Which sentences?
Starting in number 3.
Number 3, the ego, which is not real. All right, we've already said this. The ego is an illusion. It's a dream. It's not real. And it attempts to persuade the mind. Well, the mind is real because God is mind. Spirit is mind. It doesn't have a body, physical body, but it is mind. And so the ego tries to persuade the mind that the body is more real than the mind is. And people are very concerned about their bodies and are driven by their bodies, the pleasure and pain, the hunger and the thirst, everything about the body. And people are very, very concerned about their body and they think it's real. Only the people who realize that their body is not real, that they made their body, that they're not really the body, but they are spirit in their mind, get caught up into this ego dream.
Could you define mind?
Mind is the thought of God. How's that?
Okay, it's not a physical thing. Oh, I'm thinking brain should be
No,
thing. The
your
mind is
brain is not your mind.
okay.
No. Mind inhabits the brain. The brain is a tool that helps the mind communicate. But mind pervades the entire universe, and there's only one mind. That's why we are all one. Mind is a spiritual substance. It's the
It's
thought of God.
the energy of God that connects us all.
Yes. So stop and think about it this way. Your brain is just a radio, a TV. It's a sender and a receiver. It transmits thoughts, it picks up thoughts that are traveling through mind. But the mind is all of the thoughts that are in the airwaves that you can't see. All the frequencies that are transmitted throughout. And if you have a working radio and you can turn the dial and you can pick up the different stations just out of the thin air. And that's how the brain works. The brain is a transmitter and receiver. It's just a radio. It's a tool that the mind uses, but it's not the mind. Does that make sense now?
Yes. I'm a little mixed up between the brain and the mind.
Right. And then it ends by saying, no one in his right mind, in other words, in his spirit mind, could possibly believe this, what the ego believes, and no one in his right mind does believe it. If you're thinking with your spirit mind, then you know that the ego's an illusion and you don't believe the lies of ego. So paragraph 6, hear then the one answer of the Holy Spirit to all the questions the ego raises. You are a child of God, a priceless part of his kingdom, which he created as part of him. Nothing else exists, and only this is real. You have chosen a sleep in which you have had bad dreams, but the sleep is not real, and God calls you to awake. There will be nothing left of your dream when you hear him, because you will awaken. Your dreams contain many of the ego's symbols, and they have confused you. Yet that was only because you were asleep and did not know. When you wake, you will see the truth around you and in you, and you will no longer believe in dreams because they will have no reality for you. Yet the kingdom and all that you have created there will have great reality for you because they are beautiful and true. Yes, David.
So most of my life, I seem to understand things, but now I seem to understand them on a deeper level, not just the definition, but I feel the energy of the words. Um, and it's like I stepped up another level on the ladder of understanding.
Good.
Is that what they're talking about?
Yes. Yeah, that's part of it. But the metaphor is very clear, and this is repeated throughout the course, that we're dreaming. The only reality is God. We're the child of God. God made us by extending himself. But we fell asleep. We had a mad thought that we could separate ourselves from God, and we immediately fell asleep. And when we did, we created the ego, we created the universe, we created the body, we created all of this, which is in the dream that we're living. And because we're still in bodies, we're still in the dream. We have not yet awakened. But we're getting close to awakening. You know how when you're sleeping and you're completely unconscious, and then as you start waking up, you start to get some awareness of yourself. You may be dreaming, and then you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is a dream, this isn't real. And so finally you get to the point where you get up out of bed and you say, oh, I'm awake now. I was just dreaming. All of that wasn't real. Well, that's the process that we're going through now. We're awakening. And when we are fully awakened, we will transcend out of the dream and into the reality of God.
Well, one thing if I unmuted, I don't know. One thing I noticed recently is thanking God. When I thank God and I do things for God, there's a connection there. It's not. It's I guess the word would be humility. Things happen when I do that.
Good. Yes, being thankful, forgiving, those are tools that we use to help us awaken. Being loving, compassionate, forgiving, thankful, those are all tools that help us awaken. Suzanne, did you want to say anything? You have to unmute if you're going to talk.
Dave said anything I wanted to say. He was in the room. You know, it is hard stuff.
What?
This is hard, you know. You're living in the world, but you're not in the world, but you still live in the world, and you know, walk through walls with your spirit, but you know, you bash into them with your ego, you know. So it's like it's tough stuff.
Okay, it is difficult to begin with, but the more you think this way, the more you study the course, and the more you start thinking this way, the easier it becomes. It's just like anything else. If you want to learn the piano, you can't just sit at the piano the first time and play Mozart. You have to start somewhere, and you have to learn, and you have to practice and practice and practice. And it's just like anything else that we have to learn. This is just a learning process. And that's why they call it a course. You're in school. You're taking a course. You're learning. You have to study. You're going to have a test.
We have a test every day.
Every day. Every time you have to decide between spirit and ego, you're having a test. Every time you have to decide between love and hate, you're having a test. Every time you have to decide about holding a grudge or forgiving, you're having a test. Every time you have to decide about being angry or letting it go, you're having a test. You're having a test every day,
Every minute.
every minute. All right, let's go on to paragraph 7. In the kingdom where you are and what you are is perfectly certain. There is no doubt, because the first question, who am I, was never asked. Having finally been wholly answered, it has never been. Being alone lives in kingdom, where everything lives in God without question. That reminds me of what Jesus said, I am that I am. It's simply being. That's the way this word is being used. Being alone lives in this kingdom. Being is the only thing that lives in this kingdom. The I am that I am is the only thing that lives in the kingdom, where everything lives in God without question. There's no question about it. The time spent on questioning in the dream has given way to creation and to its eternity. You are as certain as God because you are as true as He is. But what was once certain in your mind has become only the ability for certainty. So, we can take comfort in that. I mean, if you really understand what this is saying, this is like a promise to us that as we awaken out of the dream, we will embrace the certainty that we are within God. God is within us. That we are in the kingdom, that we are the Son of God, that we are the Spirit, and the Spirit is within us. And so there's no more questions then. Everything's certain because it is truth with a capital T. And the ego is forgotten. The ego is disappeared. It's gone. Paragraph 8. The introduction of abilities to being what was the beginning of uncertainty, because abilities are potential. Oh, the introduction of abilities into being, into reality, was the beginning of uncertainty when the ego started, because abilities are potentials, not accomplishments. Your abilities are useless in the presence of God's accomplishments and also of yours. Accomplishments are results that have been achieved. When they are perfect, abilities are meaningless. It is curious that the perfect must now be perfected. In fact, it is impossible. Remember, however, that when you put yourself in an impossible situation, you believe that the impossible is possible. Well, we're being introduced to a couple of new terms now. And as the Course does throughout the Course. It explains something, and then it explains it again, and then it explains it again, and then it explains it again. But it looks at it from different points of view in the explanation. So now we're getting these terms of abilities and accomplishments. It's just saying the same thing it's already said, but now it's using different terms to explain it a different way, because the Course realizes that some people are going to get it and understand it one way, and other people are going to get it and understand it from another way. And even though it's saying the same thing over and over again, by presenting it from different points of view, it's trying to, cover it all so that anybody who's studying this has a chance of learning it. So abilities, like the ability to play the piano, must be developed before you can use them in the ego world. And then it says that this isn't true of anything that God created, but it is the kindest solution possible for what you made. In other words, we made this ego, and so we made ourselves abilities that we have to be able to learn. We're in an impossible situation, which means we're in ego, and we can develop our abilities to the point where we can get out of it, our ability to comprehend the spiritual awareness. We can develop our abilities to learn the spiritual truths and to act as spirit in the world. And that will get us out of this impossible situation. And you have a guide on how to develop them. That's the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is our guide. But you have no commander except yourself, because you have free will, and nobody is going to command you. Spirit will not say, you must do this, you must do that. Spirit will say, well, if you want to get out of this, then this is what we suggest you do. But Spirit never forces anybody against their will. You have to decide that. You have to be your own commander. You have to stand up and say, I'm the general of my own army, and I'm going to decide to forgive instead of hold a grudge. I'm going to decide to have compassion instead of being selfish. I'm going to decide. We have free will, and Spirit will not decide for us. It'll only guide us. It'll only show us the way. We have to be the commander of ourselves. This leaves you in charge of the kingdom, with both a guide to find it with Holy Spirit and a means to keep it. Because when you decide, then you're letting go of the ego. And so you have the means. You're using spiritual energy to release ego. You have a model to follow. The Holy Spirit, Jesus, other holy men. We all have models to follow who will strengthen your command and never detract from it in any way. Spirit will never detract from you in any way. You therefore retain the central place in your imagined enslavement, which is in itself demonstrates that you are not enslaved. We think we're enslaved because we're thinking with ego thoughts. Once we start thinking with spiritual thoughts, we realize that no, we're not enslaved at all. I am the commander of myself. I can decide. questions.
But the I, okay, so you got the ego, you got the spirit, and then you got the I, which is the free will.
Yeah.
And that's the bridge between the two.
Yeah, otherwise known as the decider.
Decider.
The
So you're really-
decider is the I in the middle between the ego and the Holy Spirit.
Right. Spent a lot of time on the bridge then.
Yeah, lifetimes, if you believe in reincarnation, thousands of them.
Yeah. Such a different way of thinking. You're right. You do have to keep studying it all the time. Such a different way of thinking. I remember when the Course taught me I was not a sinner. That was important. That was a biggie.
Mhm.
I wasn't born with sin. No, no. But I believed it. I believed that I never did believe I was born with sin. So it confirmed what I believed. But that was big.
Yeah, that whole, I mean, I was brought up Catholic and the original sin, and we were all born sinners, and then Jesus came to redeem us all, but unfortunately we didn't get redeemed. And
There we are. We're just, bad children, bad children.
right, right. And that's the thing, for most of us that grew up with any religion at all, I'm not sure how it was for you, David, with Judaism, because Judaism isn't so big on the you are the sinner, are they? You're muted. You're muted, David.
Touch your button.
You're still muted. There you go.
There you
What?
go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
So they say we missed the mark, like an archery term. There's no sin. You just try again.
You missed the
Try-
mark, so try again.
Try to hit the bullseye.
Right. Okay.
It's like when you're raising children, you can't tell them they're bad all the time. After a while, they're going to believe it.
That's right. And then they'll be it.
Right. So
Mm,
I use that when I raise my children.
right.
We all missed the mark. They were born innocent, though. I was witness to that. And then we all kind of get influenced and mess up. But then we can turn ourselves around with a Course in Miracles.
Right. Yeah. Well, a lot of the Catholic and Protestant religions are, I can't speak for many of the others, but they're big on sin. And the Course does teach us that no.
The other thing they're big on is you'll go to heaven, or you won't,
Yeah, but they're big on a heaven that's separated from us.
Yes.
It's up there in the clouds.
Yes.
See, that's the other problem. And yet it says in the Testament that Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Yes.
But they kind of gloss over that. They don't want to teach that the kingdom of heaven is within us.
Well, it's all about, it's a transactional religion, basically.
Right.
And if you pay enough, you'll get into heaven, basically. That's what most of those religions are. I don't know about Judaism. Judaism doesn't believe in that at all, right, David?
What don't they believe in?
Judaism. What do they believe in when you die?
Her comment was, if you pay up, then you get into heaven.
No, the Judaism, if if you pay, you gotta see it in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
You got to atone, right?
Uh, atone, like atonement, the one minute.
Well, the Jewish
Um,
sense. Well, all right, let's not get off
it
the
now.
track.
Okay.
Let's go back to paragraph 10. It says, you are in an impossible situation only because you think it is possible to be in one. You would be in an impossible situation if God showed you your perfection and proved to you that you were wrong. This would demonstrate that the perfect are inadequate to bring themselves to the awareness of their perfection, and thus side with the belief that those who have everything need help and are therefore helpless. This is the kind of reasoning in which the ego engages. God, who knows that his creations are perfect, does not affront them. This would be as impossible as the ego's notion that it has affronted him. Well, I kind of stumbled over that paragraph. Let's try it again. I'm going to substitute we for you. We are in an impossible situation because we think it is possible to be in one. If we're thinking with ego mind, then we think that we're in an impossible situation. Oh my God, I'm going to die. We would be in an impossible situation if God showed us our perfection and proved to you and proved to us that we were wrong. This would demonstrate that the perfect are inadequate to bring themselves to the awareness of their perfection, and thus side with the belief that those who have everything need help and are therefore helpless. Everything that's saying in the past couple of sentences is demonstrating how ego thinks. And then it says, this is the kind of reasoning in which the ego engages, which obviously is wrong thinking, because the ego's insane. God, who knows that his creations are perfect, does not affront them. In other words, he doesn't push that in our face. Like I said, Spirit doesn't demand anything from you. Spirit doesn't push you to do anything. Spirit allows you to come back into your true self on your own, according to your own free will. So God doesn't affront us. This would be as impossible as the ego's notion that it has affronted him. The ego thinks it has affronted God, and that's why the ego is afraid of God. And he thinks that God's going to punish him, which is all, again, crazy thinking. It's insanity, which is the hallmark of ego, insanity. And then it says, paragraph 11, that is why the Holy Spirit never commands. To command is to assume inequality, which the Holy Spirit demonstrates does not exist. We are all equal. Fidelity to premise is a law of mind, and everything God created is faithful to his laws, not to ego's laws. Fidelity to other laws is also possible, however, not because the laws are true, but because you made them. We made the ego, and we made the ego laws. What would be gained if God proved to you that you have thought insanely? Can God lose his own certainty? I have frequently said that what you teach, you are. Would you have God teach you that you have sinned? If he confronted the self you made with the truth he created for you, what could you be but afraid? You would doubt your own right mind, which is the only place where you can find the sanity he gave you. And that is why Spirit never commands. God does not teach. To teach is to imply a lack, which God knows is not there. God is not conflicted. Teaching aims at change, but God created only the changeless. The separation was not a loss of perfection, but a failure in communication. A harsh and strident form of communication arose as the ego's voice. It could not shatter the peace of God, but it could shatter yours. God did not blot it out, because to eradicate it would be to attack it. Being questioned, he did not question. He merely gave the answer. His answer is your teacher. God's answer is Holy Spirit. So we have reached the end of this lesson for today. And so the floor is open for any further comments and questions. You may unmute.
This is a tough lesson. It was confusing. For me, it was a tough lesson.
I'm going to suggest you've got it there on the computer. You can reread it.
I am going to read it.
Save this page.
I'm going to save the page because.
Or just save the email where I sent you the link in, and then you can just click the link and you'll go right back to it.
It was tough because you had to be on a bridge and you had to be conscious 100% of the time.
That's a goal.
Yeah, I know. Conscious 100% of the time. You know, what do the Sufis always say? You know, your reactions, you must, every impulse must be checked. Every impulse must be checked. That's the Sufis believe. Nothing should happen without mindfulness. Nothing. That's what this requires. Mindfulness. And you know, it's not a easy course, you know.
Once you learn the terms, what they mean, it's easier, and you only learn that through repetition.
Well, I learned what ego meant a long time ago in this course, but it's such a operating principle in the world, especially now. You know, that it's I feel under its realm. I mean, I just feel under its realm, under its power. Not my ego, mind you, but the ego of many, many others, you know. I feel at the mercy of the ego vast amounts of people. And so in order to do this course correctly and, honor it if I believe in it, which I think I do, I'm being asked to give up the tool with which the entire nation is being run. It's just tough, day-to-day life, having to deal with people who are constantly trying to literally swindle us, one way or another. And, how to apply these principles in those situations.
So is that ego thinking?
What I just said?
Yeah.
Probably.
Isn't it?
Yeah, sure is. How would it be spirit thinking? Spirit thinking would go,
Well, you come from love and compassion
And forgiveness.
and forgiveness. And, if you come from hurt and anger, that's ego. It's a hard lesson. It's taken, I don't know how many years I've been doing this, but it really works once you get a hold of it.
well, I mean,
It brings you peace.
in many instances, I can, make that choice. It's tough when, like when someone tries to rob me, it just gets tough at that point in time. You go, oh, I forgive you. I forgive you for wiping this out, for robbing all this money.
What do you forgive?
Huh?
What do you forgive? Do you forgive the person or forgive the act? What is your forgiveness?
Well, and what I'm talking about right now, I haven't reached that point of forgiveness. Okay, that's what I'm saying. There's certain things that are hard to go, okay, okay.
She's giving an example.
What?
You're giving an example. If somebody robbed you of all of your money, how could you forgive them, right?
Well, yeah, kind of. Somebody really, yeah. And John and I are in a situation like that now, where someone is really, really gone and behaved in an unprincipled, dishonest, and greedy way. Let's just put it that way. And it's cost a lot of people a lot of money and aggravation. Okay, so how do you just it's hard to deal with it. That's all. Hard to be loving and forgiving, and the concept is great, but when met with it's hard.
It's how you interpret it.
Well, no,
I know what you're saying though, because I've been there and done that.
I'm talking about something that's happening as we speak. Okay, and it's that's all. I just.
Well, I wish you well, and that you can go within yourself and seek forgiveness for the situation and the people involved. And the Course teaches that the true forgiveness is not forgiving something because they did something wrong, but because they're completely innocent. And the reason they're completely innocent is because they are spiritual beings. And the spiritual being who they are would not have done that or acted in that way that their ego self did. And so you really try to connect with them as spirit to spirit and bypass the ego altogether. And that would be true forgiveness, of being able to realize that They are spiritual beings. They missed the mark. They erred because they were working out of ego. But I'm going to choose to see them as spiritual beings and connect with them in forgiveness on that level and allow the ego part to fall behind me, to release that and let it go. It's easier for some people to do that than others, but that's the goal. That's what we aim for.
It's hard right now. Right this minute,
Right.
it's a hard call. I mean, being honest,
Yeah.
it's a hard call, but maybe I'll get there. I mean, one of the reasons I came tonight was to get there.
And we hope you'll join us again next week, but we have reached our time.
Thank you, John.
And thank you for your participation, Suzanne, David.
David, nice meeting you, David.
We'll end with a moment of silence.